I'm just a grandmother who once thought I would die in silence. The night they left me out there, no coat, no shoes, nothing but my house dress, and the rain falling like judgment, I knew something inside me had broken. But I didn't yet realize that something else had been born. You see, I wasn't always this fragile little lady you're probably picturing right now. Once I was a woman who gave her entire life to the people I loved without question, without pause, without even wondering if they'd do the same for me. That was my first mistake. That night, I sat on the front porch of the house I'd helped pay for, the house where I'd rocked my grandchildren to sleep, baked birthday cakes, ironed my husband's shirts, and cried quietly in the bathroom so nobody else would have to feel the weight I carried. And there, I was thrown out like an old newspaper no one bothered to read anymore. They didn't even look me in the eye. My son's wife, she didn't yell. She didn't curse. She simply opened the door and said, "You're causing too much trouble, and we all need space. Maybe you can stay with a friend tonight." Then she closed the door behind me. My son didn't say a word, not one. I sat there and listened to the bolt slide into place. That sound will stay with me until the day I leave this world. The rain soaked through my thin dress within minutes. It clung to me like shame. I couldn't move. I couldn't even cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid the sound of my sobs would disturb them inside their warm house. I didn't want to be a problem. Imagine that. After everything, I still didn't want to be a burden. I wish I could tell you that was the beginning of the end. But no, it was the beginning of something else entirely. As I sat there shivering, I remembered a moment clear as crystal from when I was a young mother. My son had scraped his knee badly on the pavement. Blood everywhere, him screaming, and I didn't hesitate. I picked him up, cradled him, pressed my scarf to the wound, and kissed his forehead until he stopped shaking. That was who I had been. That was the love I gave. And now he left me on a wet wooden porch like I was some stray mutt that had wandered too close. Why? What had I done that was so terrible? Nothing and everything. I had gotten old. I had gotten slower. I forgot where I put things sometimes. I needed help getting to the doctor. I became inconvenient, and inconvenient women don't get space on the inside of the house. They get the porch, in the rain. I stayed there until dawn. The porch light never turned on. No one opened the door. Not even to check. Not even to pretend to care. At sunrise, I stood up on shaky legs and walked down the steps. My slippers squished. My knees ached. But I walked away from that house with something I hadn't had in a long, long time. Anger. And beneath that anger, a quiet, trembling strength I had forgotten I possessed. They thought they threw me away that night, but they didn't know they had just set me free. Do you want to know how it got to that night? The one where they left me outside in the cold rain, like I was nothing? It didn't happen overnight. No, that kind of cruelty takes time to grow. It creeps in quietly dressed up as help and concern, until one day you realize you vanished inside your own life. It started the day I moved in with my son David and his wife Emily. I had just lost my husband, my Jack. 47 years of marriage, and then a heart attack stole him from me in the middle of a sentence. We were having tea. He said, "Han, remind me to call," and then he was gone. After the funeral, I stayed in our home for a while. But grief, it's heavy. And silence, it becomes a kind of second death. The walls started closing in. Every room echoed with Jack's absence. The creak of the stairs, the dent in his chair, his tools lined up in the garage like they were waiting for him to come home. David said, "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a while? We've got the space." It's what Dad would want. I didn't want to be a bother. But Emily smiled thin-lipped and said, "It might be good for all of us." At first, it was all right. I had a small room, and I kept to myself. I helped with the laundry, folded sheets, made dinner when I could. I didn't want to sit still. I needed to feel useful. But somewhere along the way, the things I offered turned into expectations. Mom, since you're home all day, could you handle the groceries? Would you mind watching the kids tonight? We need a date night. Do you really have to use the oven during the afternoon? It heats up the house. I started noticing how Emily's smiles got tighter. My opinions became interruptions. My presence, an inconvenience. She rearranged the kitchen to make it easier, but somehow I could never find anything anymore. Once I sat in the living room and laughed at a show I used to watch with Jack. Emily walked in and said, "Oh, I thought you'd be in your room." As if I needed permission to sit in a home I had helped finance. Then came the little insults, the jabs. "Mom's memory isn't what it used to be," said with a giggle in front of guests. "Don't mind her, she's from a different time. She means well." That one always came after I'd said something completely reasonable. But it was David's silence that cut the deepest. My son, my only child, he stopped looking me in the eye, like he was ashamed of me. Or maybe ashamed of what he was allowing. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. "I thought this was temporary," Emily hissed. "We didn't sign up for this forever." "She's my mother," David said. "No, she's your burden," she snapped, "and I'm the one carrying it." That was the day I stopped sitting in the living room. That was the day I started shrinking. I became the maid, the ghost, the obligation that nobody wanted to say out loud. I did the chores before they got home, so I wouldn't be in the way. I barely spoke at dinner, just smiled and passed the salt. I tiptoed in my own footsteps. I kept telling myself this is just a rough patch. They love me. They're just stressed. But love doesn't feel like fear. Love doesn't make you smaller. Love doesn't throw you outside like trash. Looking back now, I see it all so clearly. I see how they wore me down piece by piece until I no longer felt like someone worth fighting for. Not even by myself. Until that night in the rain. That night didn't just show me who they were. It reminded me of who I used to be. And I was done being invisible. You know, there are moments in life that brand themselves into your bones. They never fade, not with time, not with forgiveness, not even with understanding. That night was one of them. It had been raining since late afternoon. The sky was dark, like someone had wrung out all the color. The kids were yelling, the dog barking, Emily slamming drawers. I stayed quiet in my room folding towels for the 4th time just to look busy. Just to have a reason to exist. Around 6 p.m., I heard David calling Mom. "Emily needs help with the groceries." No please, no warmth, just a command. I rushed out, grabbed an umbrella, and headed down the front steps in my house slippers. The rain had soaked through the doormat, and the air bit cold for early spring. Emily's SUV trunk was open bags piled high. I smiled and said I've got it, but she didn't answer. She was on the phone complaining to someone about something I couldn't quite hear over the rain. I carried in 2 armfuls, then went back for more. As I reached in for a final bag, I heard the door slam shut behind me. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe it was the wind. But when I turned to go back inside, locked. I knocked once, twice, called out David. Nothing. I tried the bell. No answer. I stepped back, water now dripping into my socks. The porch light flickered, but didn't come on. I waited. Maybe they didn't hear me. Maybe they were getting the kids ready for dinner. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. My hand trembled when I knocked again. Still nothing. I called out louder this time, a knot forming in my chest. David, Emily. The rain was heavier now, thundering off the roof. I stood there, groceries in hand, soaked through and shivering. My knuckles were pale from clutching the bags. That's when it hit me. They weren't coming. They had locked me out intentionally or not, I didn't know. But no one inside cared enough to check. No one noticed I was missing. No one cared. I dropped the bags. Oranges rolled across the porch. A loaf of bread dissolved in the puddle near my feet. I sat down on the wet step, my back to the door, and cried. Not loud. Just quiet tears that slipped down like the rain. I wasn't crying because I was cold, or because my back hurt, or because my slippers were soaked. I cried because that was the moment I finally knew I didn't matter to them. They could forget me that easily. They could shut the door that easily. You spend your whole life giving every breath, every dollar, every ounce of your love, and you expect, what? Gratitude, kindness. A little space at the table. Instead, I was treated like clutter. Like something they meant to throw away, but hadn't found the right day. Well, that was the day. I don't know how long I sat there. Time loses shape when you're unwanted. Eventually, a neighbor, sweet Mrs. Thomas from 2 houses down, spotted me and hurried over with an umbrella. "Are you all right?" she asked, horrified. I shook my head. "They forgot I was out here," I lied. She helped me to her porch, wrapped me in a dry blanket, and made me tea. "Stay here tonight if you need," she said. And I did. That night, I slept on her couch warm for the first time in years. Not because of the blanket, but because someone had seen me. Someone had cared. And the next morning, I woke up with a quiet fire in my chest. It was the first flicker of rage, of dignity, of something I thought I'd lost. They thought they'd shut me out. They had no idea what they had just set free. The morning after they locked me out, I stood outside my son's house still wearing the clothes from the night before, damp and wrinkled. The rain had stopped, but the heaviness in the air stayed with me. I didn't knock. I didn't want to. But my purse, my medications, my belongings, all of it was inside. So was the part of me still trying to make excuses for them. They didn't mean it, that voice said. It was just a mistake. When David opened the door, his face was blank. No panic, no concern, just annoyance. "Where were you?" he asked, like I was the one who had disappeared without warning. "I was locked out," I said calmly. He scoffed. "You should have knocked harder. Emily said you just left." Left. It took every ounce of my strength not to scream. I was standing right outside the door. He shrugged and stepped aside. "Well, you're back now. Come in." I walked past him without a word. No apology. No one checked if I was okay. Emily didn't even look up from her phone when I passed the kitchen. That's when it truly sank in. I wasn't family in that house. I was furniture, something convenient when needed, a burden when not. The rest of the day passed like every other. I made breakfast. I packed school lunches. I cleaned the bathroom. I folded laundry. Not one person said thank you. When the kids came home, they hugged Emily, told David about their day. When they saw me, they said nothing, not even a glance. I didn't blame them. They were just children. But it hurt all the same. That night, I sat in my small room staring at the old picture frame I kept on my nightstand. It was me, David, and his father years ago when life felt warmer. Before bitterness crept into David's eyes. Before his wife made me feel like a guest in the very family I helped build. How had it come to this? How had I poured my entire life into raising a child only to be discarded like I didn't exist? I remembered the sacrifices. Working double shifts to buy his first car. Skipping meals so he had enough. Staying up late to sew his graduation suit when we couldn't afford a new one. And now I was the old woman in the back room. Not mom, not grandma, just an obligation. But something inside me shifted after that rainy night. I started watching, listening, noticing little things. Emily took calls behind closed doors, whispering about the estate and what she's worth. David had begun opening my mail just to help, he claimed. And then I found the paperwork, tucked under a pile of bills, power of attorney. He had forged my signature. My hands shook as I held the papers. Not because I was afraid, but because the betrayal had gone deeper than I ever thought possible. They weren't just indifferent. They were planning something. They saw me not as a person, but as a bank account, as a house to sell, a body to move. And that night, for the first time in years, I locked my own door. Not to keep danger out, but to start keeping my dignity in. The next few days were different. Not on the surface. No, I still cooked breakfast, still washed dishes, still stayed quiet when Emily made snide remarks like, She's lucky we let her stay here. But something had shifted inside me. I began to take notes, literally. I kept a small notebook hidden in the bottom of my knitting bag. In it, I started recording every strange thing I overheard, every whisper behind the door, every phone call they tried to take in hushed voices when they thought I wasn't listening. Emily mentioned appraisal twice. David asked someone over the phone, "How long does probate take if she's still alive?" Still alive. That phrase sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. They were planning something. And I needed to understand what. One afternoon, while Emily was at the salon and David had gone to the hardware store, I found the courage to look through their home office. That's when I saw it, an unsigned contract for a retirement facility in another state. My name was on the document. Not a home. Not even a decent senior community. It was one of those facilities you hear horror stories about, where people disappear into silence. They were going to send me away, without telling me. The tears came hot and fast, but not because I was sad. I was furious. I had changed David's diapers, stayed up all night when he had fevers, held his hand at his father's funeral when he sobbed like a little boy. And now he was planning to ship me off like a problem. That night, I didn't cry. I planned, because if they thought I was just some frail old woman with no fight left, they had no idea who raised them. Over the next few weeks, I played along. I smiled. I nodded. I acted exactly like they wanted, meek, quiet, small. But inside, I was preparing. I contacted an old friend, Margaret, a retired paralegal I hadn't seen in years. We met at the park on a sunny Wednesday under the guise of a casual walk. I showed her the documents David had forged. She stared at them and then looked up at me with steel in her eyes. "We're going to fix this," she said. And for the first time in months, I believed it. Because I wasn't going to be discarded. I wasn't going to be silenced. And I sure as hell wasn't going to disappear quietly. They might have locked me outside in the rain. But now, I was inside watching, remembering, building. And when the moment came, I'd be ready. Some people say the pen is mightier than the sword. I never really believed that, until the day I wrote that letter. It was a simple piece of stationery, nothing fancy. But each word I wrote carried the weight of every sleepless night, every insult swallowed, every time I'd been ignored, belittled, and tossed aside like I didn't matter. I addressed it to Emily and David, and in that letter I told them everything I'd never dared to say out loud. I told them about the day they left me in the rain. Not just the water soaking through my sweater, but the humiliation, the betrayal that drenched me more than any storm ever could. I told them I remembered every little detail they assumed I'd forget, every snide comment, every whisper, every secret meeting. And then I told them something that made my hands shake as I wrote. I have taken back control. Because with the help of Margaret, I'd already filed legal documents invalidating the power of attorney they'd secretly obtained through deceit. I'd appointed a new trustee, someone I trusted. And I'd transferred what was left of my estate to a protected account. They thought they were bleeding me dry, but I was no longer their open faucet. The next morning, I left the letter on the kitchen counter. Then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I walked out the door not with a suitcase full of pain, but with my head held high. I moved in with Margaret temporarily. Her spare room wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. And peace? That's a luxury I hadn't tasted in years. Later that evening, I got the first text message from Emily. It said, "Just one thing, you ungrateful witch." I laughed. It wasn't nice, but it was real. And it was freeing. She wasn't mad that I'd hurt her. She was mad I'd outsmarted her. I didn't respond. Because silence, when it's chosen, is power. That week, I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children, telling stories, laughing again. One little girl asked me, "Were you always this happy?" And I said, "No, sweetie. I had to fight for it." What they took from me, money, trust, comfort, was nothing compared to what I had rebuilt. They had left me outside in the storm, hoping I'd vanish. Instead, I returned with thunder behind me. And I wasn't done yet. It's funny how people only start asking questions when the damage is already done. About a week after I moved in with Margaret, I started noticing changes in the neighborhood, not the place itself, but the way people looked at me. The first time I went back to my old street to gather a few things I had left behind, I walked past my former house. Emily's car was in the driveway, engine off, blinds drawn. But two of the neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, Linda and Tom, stopped me near the sidewalk. Linda's voice trembled. "Ruth, is it true what we heard?" I paused. "Depends on what you heard." Tom chimed in. "That they left you outside? That you were—" He struggled to finish the sentence, left there, like garbage in the rain. I nodded, eyes dry. "Yes, that part is true." Linda covered her mouth like she'd heard a crime confession. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I had run out of room in my life for pity. But what came next stunned me. "You know," she said gently, "we always wondered why your lights were off so early. We thought maybe you were just resting. We had no idea they were locking you in." It was as if the entire neighborhood had been asleep for years, and suddenly they were waking up to the truth. A week later, Margaret invited me to a small gathering at the community center. I was hesitant. At first, I wasn't sure how to show up in a room full of people when I was still healing from being treated like I didn't belong anywhere. But when I walked in, something shifted. People stood up, literally stood up. They clapped. I thought maybe someone famous had entered behind me. But no. They were clapping for me because Linda had told everyone what had happened. She didn't name names, but the words abandonment, abuse, and resilience were all in the air. I had become a symbol not of weakness, but of quiet rebellion, of surviving betrayal and still showing up with dignity. A woman named Marie, whose daughter hadn't called her in 3 years, came up to me with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "You're my reminder to speak up before it's too late." I hugged her, not because I had the answers, but because I understood the silence. That night, I realized something profound. Being left out in the rain didn't break me. It revealed me. It peeled away the illusions, the masks, the fear. And what was left was a woman who had nothing to prove, but everything to reclaim. I wasn't just a forgotten grandmother. I was becoming a voice for the forgotten. And I was just getting started. Margaret had a ritual. Every Sunday morning, she brewed 2 cups of black coffee and set one at my spot before I even got out of bed. She never asked questions, but she listened like no one else ever had. That morning, she found me staring at a blank piece of paper on the table. "You writing something?" she asked. I shook my head, trying to. "Something for Emily?" I nodded slowly. It wasn't a letter to beg or blame. I had no interest in that anymore. But there was a part of me still bruised, but no longer bleeding, that needed to say what had never been said. I wrote, "Dear Emily, you once held my hand and asked if you'd be a good mother someday. I told you yes, because I believed you had love in your heart. Somewhere between the mortgages, the routines, and your husband's ambitions, that love got buried. Not gone, just forgotten. I gave you my youth, my sleepless nights, my favorite recipes, my stubborn faith that you would be better than I ever was. And then one rainy night, you closed the door on all of it. On me. I sat in the rain like trash. Not because I was nothing, but because you forgot I was once your everything. I don't need your apology anymore, but I do need you to remember this: I survived. Without your warmth, without your kindness, without the home I helped build. And that Emily is the power of a mother's heart, not because it cannot break, but because it keeps beating, even after it's been thrown away. Mom? I never mailed it. I didn't need to. The moment I folded the letter and placed it in a box Margaret had given me a place for, unsent things, she called it, I felt something lift. Not forgiveness exactly, but peace. And that peace made room for something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. I wasn't writing from a place of weakness. I was reclaiming the voice that had been silenced under duty, tradition, and guilt. That night, I read the letter aloud to Margaret. She cried quietly, and then she smiled. "You've already won, Ruth," she said. "They just don't know it yet." And in that moment, I believed her. I had lost everything that night in the rain, but I had found something more powerful, my truth. And no one could throw that away. It had been exactly 73 days since the rain-soaked night my daughter abandoned me. I wasn't counting, but the heart has its own calendar. Life with Margaret had become my sanctuary. We shared laughter over breakfast, quiet afternoons filled with stories, and evenings that softened the ache of what I'd lost. Still, part of me stayed quietly alert like a stray dog, too used to being kicked. That morning, Margaret was out volunteering at the community center, and I was alone in the living room when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, not the knock of a friend or neighbor. No, it was the knock of someone unsure if they had the right to be there. I opened the door, and there she was. Emily! She looked older than I remembered. The perfect curls weren't perfect anymore. Her blouse, once crisp and neat, was creased. But it wasn't her appearance that stunned me. It was her eyes. They weren't cold. They were hollow. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. Her voice trembled, barely recognizable. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I saw a video online. About abandoned elders. About what people do to their parents. And I saw your name on a list. A public registry. She paused. I didn't know what to do with the shame. There, it was raw and unfiltered. Shame. But still no apology. Just explanations wrapped in excuses. "I didn't come to take you back," she continued. I thought maybe you'd want to see the kids." The kids. My grandchildren. My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't seen them since the night I was left in the rain like unwanted furniture. I managed a whisper. "Do they want to see me?" She hesitated. Then quietly, "They ask about you every week." I turned toward the living room, toward the armchair, where I'd been writing a new chapter of my life. I looked at the photographs Margaret had taken of me smiling again. Of me finding joy again. And I said without malice, "They can visit me here." Emily flinched. "I'm not coming back to that house," I added. "That chapter's done." Tears welled in her eyes. I understand. But the truth was she didn't. Not fully.
Not yet.
Still, something in her cracked open that day. A splinter of awareness that maybe, just maybe, what she'd done wasn't defensible. It wasn't repairable. But it could be faced. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me talk to you." And then she left. No hug. No promises. Just silence. But this time, I wasn't left in the rain. This time, I stayed dry, wrapped in the warmth of my own strength. Margaret came home to find me sitting peacefully, a slight smile on my face. "She came, didn't she?" Margaret asked gently. I nodded. "And you didn't break?" she said with a proud grin. "No," I replied, "I didn't even bend." That night, I wrote another letter. Not to Emily, to myself. Because sometimes, the most important words we need to hear are the ones we speak to our own hearts. The next few days passed in a quiet kind of stillness, one not filled with dread, but with something gentler reflection. I began writing letters, not to be sent, not to shame or to confront, but to release. Each one began the same, "Dear no one and everyone." In those pages, I poured everything I had never said. All the things I'd swallowed over decades of being the quiet one, the obedient wife, the helpful mother, the invisible grandmother. Dear no one and everyone. I gave up my youth so others could have comfort. I gave up my dreams so others could build theirs. I said yes when I meant no. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I stayed silent when silence was used as a weapon against me. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I wrote some more. I didn't realize how much I'd carried. Margaret found one of the letters lying open on the table. She didn't say a word about it, just placed a warm cup of chamomile tea beside me and whispered, "Write every one of them out. Then burn them, or read them out loud, or keep them forever. Whatever gives you peace." Peace. Such a small word. But it had become the greatest prize of all. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun began to lower its orange and gold, melting into the sky like warm honey. A breeze kissed my face gently, and I felt something unexpected. Gratitude, not for the pain I had endured, but for the clarity it had gifted me. You see, the truth is, I hadn't been thrown away. I had been released. By force, yes. By cruelty. But released nonetheless from a life that had long since forgotten. I had a voice, a name, a soul. Margaret came out with her knitting and sat beside me.
You know, I said, I don't think I want to be angry anymore.
She smiled. That doesn't mean you forgive them. I'm not sure I ever will, I said honestly. But I don't want them to live in my head anymore. Rent's too high. We laughed. It was the kind of laugh that makes the air around you shimmer. The kind you only earn after surviving storms and learning to dance in puddles. Later that night, I tucked the stack of unsent letters into an old wooden box I found in the attic. It used to hold family photos.
Now it held truth, my truth.
And I knew this much: whether or not my children ever truly saw me again, I would never again let anyone silence my story. Because I had already found the one person who needed to hear it most. Me? One Sunday morning, about 2 weeks after I'd arrived at Margaret's home, I received a letter.
Not a bill, not a flyer.
A real letter. Handwritten. The envelope was shaky and hesitant, as if unsure whether it had the right to reach me. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from Emily.
Yes, Emily, my eldest granddaughter.
The one who used to braid my hair with her little fingers while humming lullabies. The one who used to beg me for stories about how I met her grandfather. The one whose eyes once lit up when I entered a room. Her letter wasn't long,
but it was everything. Dear Grandma.
I don't know where to begin. I don't even know if this will reach you. I just know I can't stay silent anymore. I saw what they did. I saw how they pushed you out. I heard how they twisted things to make you the problem. But I remember. I remember your warm kitchen, your soft hands, your voice at bedtime, your tears though you tried to hide them. I was young, but I knew something wasn't right. I'm older now, and I'm sorry. If there's a way, if you can forgive me for not saying anything sooner, please let me know where you are. I miss you. I love you.
Emily,
I wept. No. I sobbed the kind of sob that cracks open a soul that's been shut for too long. It felt like water had reached the driest part of me. Like after being left out in the rain, someone had finally opened a window and called me back inside.
I walked straight to Margaret and handed her the letter.
She read it, then looked up, her eyes glistening.
Are you going to write back? She asked.
I nodded slowly. Not just yet.
Why not?
I looked out the window where the rain had just begun to fall soft and steady, and I smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, I said I want to write something for me first. Before I open my arms again, I need to make sure my heart's whole. Margaret just reached over and placed her hand on mine. And in that moment, I realized something deeply true. Being left out in the rain had taught me how to bloom in places no one thought I could survive. Emily's letter wasn't my rescue. It was just sunlight, and I was already beginning to grow. The days after Emily's letter felt different. Not lighter exactly. Not like everything had healed overnight. But like the air around me had finally stopped pressing down so hard. It gave me space to listen, not to the noise of the world, but to something deeper, myself. For so many years, I had drowned out my own voice. Always keeping the peace, always saying it's fine, always bending so others wouldn't break. But now, in the quiet, in Margaret's cozy little living room, with its smell of old books and coffee, I finally let myself speak out loud.
To no one. To everyone.
To me?
I didn't deserve that, I said one morning as I stood at the window. The leaves rustled gently.
I gave them my years, my hands, my prayers, and they left me out in the storm like I was nothing. And then I said it.
But I'm not nothing. I think I said it 3 or 4 times louder each time. At some point, Margaret walked in, but she didn't interrupt. She just watched.
I'm not nothing, I repeated, and it filled my lungs like I was finally breathing after years underwater. Margaret smiled. That's right, she said. Say it again if you need to. And I did.
All day long.
That afternoon, Margaret invited me to her church. I hesitated. Church had always been a place I visited with the family, sitting next to my husband, trying to hide my bruises beneath makeup and my sadness behind smiles. But she promised it was different. Come not for them, she said. Come for you. So I went, and what I found wasn't a building or a sermon. It was an old woman, maybe even older than me, standing in front of a microphone telling a story. Her story. She had been abandoned too. Betrayed, forgotten. And yet there she stood, vibrant and steady, her voice strong, her back straight. She said something that stuck with me. Silence is where we meet ourselves, but it's also where we learn to speak again. I clutched those words like a treasure, because I had lived too long in silence. It was time to make noise. That night I began to write. Not a letter. A book. No titles. No chapters. Just truth on paper. I wrote about the night it all fell apart. The rain. The door closing. The feeling of wet clothes clinging to my skin, and a heart breaking all over again. I wrote about the pain of being invisible and the miracle of being seen, not by those who used to call me mom or grandma when it was convenient, but by strangers. Angels in disguise. People like Margaret, like the woman at church, like the barista at the corner cafe who always remembered my name. That book became my fire. Every word a flame, every truth a torch. And in that quiet blaze, I found something I thought I'd lost forever. My power, not the kind that screams, the kind that stands. A few weeks later, it rained again. I was standing by the kitchen window in Margaret's home, holding a cup of tea, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The same cold sky, the same steady fall, just like the night I was thrown out like garbage. But this time, I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't see the rain as punishment. I saw it as a cleansing, a washing away of what didn't belong to me anymore. Guilt, shame, silence. That night no longer owned me. I had reclaimed it, rewritten it, turned it into a chapter, not the ending. And oh, what a chapter it had become. That same week, something unexpected happened. A letter came in the mail, handwritten, sloppy, almost nervous in the way the pen pressed too hard on the envelope. It was from my daughter, my Emily. I stared at it for a long while before opening it. My hands trembled, not from fear, just from everything. Inside the letter began, "Mom, I don't even know how to begin this. I don't know if you'll even read it, but if you do, please know that I'm sorry. I was so blind, so afraid of confronting the truth about Dad, about how we all failed you. I thought we were helping, but I see now we were helping ourselves." I had to sit down. Tears came, but they were different this time. Not from sadness, not from longing, but from the unexpected crack of light coming through a wall I thought would stand forever. She wrote about the day she saw my letter online. Yes, online. Margaret had helped me share parts of my story anonymously through a support group. One of the volunteers had posted excerpts on a blog. Emily found them while researching elderly abuse cases for her own daughter's school paper. She recognized the words. She recognized me, and it broke her. She said she'd read the entry over and over again, especially the part that said, "I used to believe that loving your family meant staying silent. But now I know love doesn't demand silence. It demands truth." She ended the letter simply, "Can I see you?" Not to fix it, just to finally listen. I read the letter again the next morning, and again that night. Margaret asked if I'd write back. But instead, I asked if Emily could visit me, not to start over, but to start right. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if healing was possible between us. But I knew this. I wasn't the same woman they abandoned in the storm. I had survived it, and now I was the storm. The day Emily came to visit, the sky was overcast again. Not raining, just gray, like it couldn't decide what kind of day it wanted to be. I understood that feeling. Margaret helped me prepare. She made tea, set out fresh muffins, even lit a cinnamon candle to make the place smell warm and safe. But my heart was caught somewhere between dread and hope. Then the knock came. I stood frozen for a second, like my feet had sunk into the floor. Margaret touched my arm, gently gave me a look that said, "You're ready." I opened the door. There she was, my daughter. The child I'd raised, the girl who used to braid my hair while I cooked dinner, the woman who had watched me grow older and eventually looked away. She looked older, too. Her eyes were red, maybe from crying, maybe from fear.
We just stood there for a moment.
Then she whispered, "Hi, Mom."
Something inside me broke and healed at the same time.
We sat in the kitchen.
At first, it was awkward. We danced around the pain like it was a wild animal in the room.
Then she said, "I saw the post. I knew it was you." I nodded. I didn't write it to hurt anyone. I wrote it because I finally remembered I mattered too.
Emily looked down, her hands shaking slightly.
I know. I am not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to understand. To finally see what I refused to see. We talked for hours. About Dad. About how he controlled everything. About how silence became our family's second language. About how she convinced herself I was just too sensitive or overdramatic.
I believed his stories, she admitted, because it was easier than facing the truth. The truth meant I was part of the problem.
Her voice cracked. You gave us everything, and we gave you nothing.
I didn't say it to shame her. I didn't say it to make her beg. I said it to free both of us. I let myself be erased, I said softly, but not anymore. We cried. We held hands. It wasn't a movie moment. There was no perfect apology or dramatic resolution.
But there was truth, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have again. She asked if she could come again.
I told her we'll see.
Not because I didn't want her,
but because this time I'd be the one to choose. It's strange how the rain sounds different now.
Not long ago, the sound of water hitting the pavement used to haunt me like it was echoing the way they discarded me, like I was nothing but a burden left to wash away. Cold, drenched, humiliated.
But today, I hear the rain and it feels cleansing. It taps on the windows of my new home, not to scare me, but to remind me you survived that storm.
A week after Emily's visit, I sat by the window and watched a small girl skip past the sidewalk with her grandmother. They were holding hands, laughing, their umbrellas forgotten as the drizzle danced around them. And I smiled, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with a soft kind of joy. Because I realized something. Even though I was left outside like trash, I didn't become trash. I became something new.
Margaret framed that newspaper clipping, the one that told a version of my story. She hung it right by the front door. Not as a warning, but as a tribute. A reminder that this place is built on truth and courage. I still get letters from women and men who say they saw themselves in my story, who say they finally spoke up, finally walked out, finally said, enough. And that means more than any apology, more than any family reconciliation, more than what they took from me.
Emily visits sometimes now.
She brings flowers. We talk about gardening. It's light, it's cautious, but it's honest. And I still go to the garden. I plant things. I water them. I talk to them even. Because there's something about tending to something that grows, that reminds you it's never too late to bloom again.
Even if you were once left to rot, even if you were once forgotten,
you can choose to remember yourself.
If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible, if you've given and given until there was nothing left and they still walked away,
please know this. You are not trash. You are not broken.
You are not too late.
You are still here and you still matter. And one day they'll look up and realize you were never the weak one. You were the light they couldn't dim.
What would you have done if you were in my place?